Hello, everyone. This is the April 4th Coalition show. We're doing a special recording of the President's Day show, and hopefully the name hasn't been changed to Dictator's Day, but right now it's still called President's Day. The April 4th Coalition's mission statement is that we are for workers' rights and collective bargaining rights, and we're against tax breaks for the rich and corporations who ship our jobs overseas. We support the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the preamble says, we, as recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equality and inalienable rights of all members of the human family, is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbaric acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and beliefs and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. Whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebel against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law, whereas it is essential to promote the development of friendly relations between nations, whereas the people of the United Nations have in the Charter reaffirmed their faith in the fundamental human rights, in the dignity and the worth of the human person, in social progress, in better standards of life, in larger freedom. Whereas member states have pledged themselves to achieve, in cooperation with the United Nations, the promotion of universal respect for the observance of human rights and the fundamental freedoms. Whereas the common understanding of these rights and freedoms is of the greatest importance for the full realization of this pledge. So we're going to emphasize Article 23 of that Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone has the right to work, the free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment. Number two, everyone without any discrimination has the right to equal pay for equal work.
Number three, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for herself or himself and his or her family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection.
Number four, everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for the protection of his or her interests.
Thank you very much. We're going to show a couple of videos today, and of course some of the information, one recording from the Senate chambers, Senator Angus King, who's an independent from Maine, had served as governor of Maine, is standing up on the Senate floor saying that we have to draw a line, that we're in a constitutional crisis. So this 20-minute speech, I think, is well worth listening to. But preceding that, there's a group, I get a lot of information from them. It's called the Docket. He's an attorney. I'm not saying the right name of it. Give me a chance. It's Democracy Docket, I think, but it talks about the lawsuits that have been filed against the administration. Let's start with that Democracy Docket for Mr. Elias.
Over the last few days, we have seen mounting evidence that Elon Musk has his lackeys under the auspices of Doge rummaging into the most highly sensitive parts of the U.S. Treasury Department. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Mark Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started.
You know, Paige, this has been a growing scandal within the federal government. What we see happening from agency to agency, where Elon Musk's Doge has people who we don't know. Some of them appear to be quite young. We don't know if they have security clearances. We don't know what their status is. Any event, we see them in agency after agency accessing some of the most highly confidential and sensitive information that the U.S. government has. This includes in the U.S. Treasury Department, where a database of literally everyone and anyone who gets payments from the federal government is contained within it. There's a lot of concern about this. Well, now, for the first time, we see litigation that is brought to stop this from happening. So the team at Democracy Docket has been all over this story. Paige, bring us up to date.
On Monday night, Public Citizen and State Democracy Defenders Fund filed a lawsuit against the Treasury Department for sharing confidential data and personal information with the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, which is Elon Musk's group that he is using to root out what he doesn't like in the federal government. Now, Mark, to fully understand the scope of this, the Treasury Department executes payments for basically all of the federal government. Last fiscal year, it dispersed over $5 trillion, or 88% of all federal payments done last year. This is a huge system. It's how people get their Social Security benefits, Medicaid. It is how federal employees are paid, federal contractors get their money. All of this information contains names, Social Security numbers, dates of birth, home addresses, contact information, bank information of millions and millions of people.
Yeah, Paige, and it's hard to know exactly what is even going on here, right? I mean, we've heard reports that they have accessed this on a read-only basis. That was a suggestion made by some, I think, close to the White House. But then we saw other reports that said, no, they can access both read and write. In other words, they can change records. So it's very, very unclear right now exactly what they are able to do and what they are doing with this information. But when you match it up against the other things we know that the Trump administration has been doing, the other things that we know that Elon Musk has been up to, it paints a very troubling picture. And let me just point your attention to another sort of branch of this whole thing, which was the effort by the Office of Management and Budget, supported by the White House, to try to freeze all federal spending under grants and loan programs. Now, that has now been blocked by not one, but by two federal courts. We've talked about that on prior videos. Democracy Docket has been covering that on its website and in its newsletters. If you're not already subscribed to those, make sure you do that now. The link is above and in the show notes below. But Paige, one of the hypotheses, and it is nothing more than a hypothesis right now, is that because they have found themselves frustrated in that arena, that by taking control of this database and being able to read the records and write over the records, that this may be just another way they're going to get at trying to prevent the disbursement of funds. Now, why is that a problem? It's a problem at two levels. One is it's a practical problem, right? If you are waiting your Social Security check, or you're a government contractor awaiting payment, or you're a nonprofit organization awaiting a grant, the idea that the federal government may simply turn off the computer system or delete your records or alter your records in a way that prevents that from happening is incredibly problematic. And like I said, that is something that the courts can get involved in, but it's not ideal, it's not fast, and the like. But the second thing, Paige, that I think it is a problem is that people are concerned about just their basic privacy. Like irrespective of whether it's going to affect the money flow or not, I think people are afraid that, what if this is weaponized in a way against political opponents? What if their personal information is somehow disclosed, either because they are an enemy of the administration or the Trump administration believes them to be an enemy, or just through, or just through error, just through people who are not familiar with the system using it and creating security vulnerability. So there's a lot going on here. And I am thrilled and glad to see that there is litigation that's being brought on behalf of these labor unions and labor organizations to fight this fight. It is a critically important fight. I suspect it's not the last of the cases we'll see on this topic. But Paige, you have to ask yourself, where the hell is the Republicans in Congress? I mean, the Republicans control the branch of government that should be most protective of its spending power, should be most concerned about the exposure of its constituents' information to these people at DOJ who, were not elected by anyone. They weren't appointed, into positions. They weren't subject to any vetting by, the normal process. And I think, you got to ask yourself, yes, the court's good. The fact that lawyers are bringing these cases, great. But you got to ask yourself, Why is Speaker Johnson, why is John Thune not standing up to this?
Right, Mike, you would also think that the party that prides itself on fiscal responsibility and wanting to be responsible with money would say, hey, maybe we don't have one guy who's not elected just magically take control over the entire country's payment system. And we also know this entire situation is improper because the career civil service employee that was the acting Treasury Secretary until Donald Trump's pick was confirmed denied Musk and his affiliates access to the system. Now, this civil service employee had been at the Treasury Department for over 35 years. He was one of the few people who had control of the system. Colleagues who have been interviewed and media outlets have described him as dedicated to his job. They never knew what his politics were. He was just focused on getting the job done. He left last week. He resigned after clashing with Musk's affiliate over trying to get access to this system.
Yeah, and I think, again, we have to put this in a broader context, Paige, because it's not just at the Treasury Department, right? We saw that at the USAID, the head of security, according to reports, physically clashed with some of the Doge people who wanted to access secure facilities, places in which highly confidential or even classified information is kept. And what was the result of that? Not that the security official won that fight, figuratively, but rather that he was suspended, he was put on leave, right? And these people were given access, presumably. And, so when you hear that at the Department of Treasury, there is, again, a career civil servant who only, interest is in protecting the American people's data, presumably, he is somehow on the losing end of a power struggle with these Doge folks, it's very, very concerning. And to make it even more concerning, Paige, I mentioned that there has been some conflicting information. Well, if you read what Donald Trump is saying, it's not clear that Donald Trump's even aware of what some of this is that's going on. When you read about some of what has been attributed to the Treasury Secretary, that somehow this was just read only, it's not clear that even the president, the White House, or the Treasury Secretary himself is aware of what's going on here. So it is entirely possible that, that you have folks who are doing what they think they can get away with, not what they have been authorized to by or intended to by the elected officials, certainly not what Republicans in Congress are stepping up and saying, look, I mean, at any time, the Republican appropriations chair could say, yep, I want unelected, unvetted people to be rummaging through the records of individual recipients of Social Security. I want them looking at the database of who gets paid and not. And I want them potentially targeting, for non-payment, people who we have passed laws to send money to. But the Republicans are not taking ownership of this. The White House is not saying, oh, yes, these people are acting directly under our control. The president doesn't seem to be saying that. And certainly Republicans in Congress aren't. So you're kind of left with, well, what is the word, Paige, we use when an unelected oligarch has his minions, in these clashes, accessing this information, potentially overseeing programs to have people resign, with pay, and, programs of shutting down agencies and this, what do we call that? Well, in another country, if this wasn't the United States, we'd certainly be describing it in much less flattering words than the legacy media is today. The legacy media today acts like this is somehow just like business as usual. In some ways, they're kind of like just sideline spectators, reporting on, this power faction or that power faction, whether the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State is winning some internecine battle. That isn't what this is. This is much more serious than that. And everyone needs to be aware of that.
Mark, I think you also have to look at it with the context of FBI agents and DOJ prosecutors being fired for their involvement in January 6th investigations, into investigations around Donald Trump's misdoings. And then you have to connect that back to Donald Trump's own reissued Schedule F executive orders, stripping career civil servants of protection so that they could be fired and replaced more easily. And you and I have talked about this before, that the vast majority of the work the federal government carries out is not done by the top politically affiliated appointed officials. It's carried out every day by the career civil servants who are there for years, if not decades, doing their jobs throughout political changes and different administrations.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make an excellent point about the FBI and the Department of Justice, because, again, in normal times, some FBI agent or someone in the Department of Justice might call over and say, hey, what's going on? They might even open an investigation. Some inspector general might open an investigation, right? Because this doesn't look normal. Now, it doesn't mean they'd open an investigation, they'd find criminality, but they'd at least inquire. But Donald Trump fired the inspector generals, fired at least 17 of them. And we know that, as you point out, the FBI is under incredible pressure. The Department of Justice, federal prosecutors are under incredible pressure right now. So which FBI agent, which remaining inspector general, which career prosecutor is going to poke their head up now and say, you know what, I have some serious questions about this? Right? They have been cowed, presumably, and by the way, understandably, by the political pressure that has just crammed on top of them. And so, you worry that what's going on at the Department of Treasury or elsewhere in the federal government is against a backstop of the cop on the beat essentially being chased off the block while suspicious activity is going on. And that is really, really worrisome. Well, Paige, let me say this. Democracy Docket is going to stay on top of this story. It stays on top. It's going to stay on top of all of the democracy news, and it's going to stay on top, particularly, of all of the litigation that you see going on. There have now been more than 20 cases filed against Donald Trump or his cronies since he's taken office, and Democracy Docket is following them and giving you good, accurate, fearless, independent information about them on a daily and weekly basis, if not more frequent. Please make sure you subscribe to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters, and stay tuned to this YouTube channel where we will be keeping you up to date as well. Thanks for joining us.
You're given a deadline, either take this and
Right.
that's in the courts too.
Right,
now.
it's in the courts, there's a stop to it, because if you notice, this was explained in a podcast
Yep.
that I listened to with a woman that covers the tech people in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And she said that if you notice it, in that letter that went out to all the employees, that email, it was just like when Musk took over that X or whatever it is, Twitter. He took it over. He sent them all an email, said reply within 48 hours that you want to stay on your job or leave.
Yep.
Well, this email that went out to all those federal employees, it didn't have Trump's name on it. It had Musk's name on it. He wants the credit for it, because he's not just an American problem. He's an international problem.
Yes, he
He's
is.
got his hands over in Germany trying to get the far right. He's saying don't feel guilty about what you did in the past. He's trying to get the very conservative people in England, the Conservative Party, back. He's trying to spend his money
Nazi
there.
salute.
He gave the Nazi salute,
Yeah.
and he's not unknown to him, because he was born and raised in South Africa. And the Trump administration today cut off all foreign aid to South Africa, and because they were saying that the poor whites that own all the land in South Africa are being mistreated, and his father's still over there. It's just tremendous. I mean, a lot of the stuff we're showing is dated. God bless you. But we're just trying to get the latest things that we can get to you. Now, I know Mark Elias, he is an attorney. He represented the Democratic Party in all those lawsuits when Trump had all those lawsuits in court to overthrow the last election. So he represents a lot of Democrats. Now we have a senator from Maine who is an independent. He represents the entire state of Maine, and he's speaking on the floor of the Senate, addressing the appointment, I believe, to the Office of Budget and Management, the person who was most responsible for Project 2025, which Trump, while running, said he had nothing to do with it. He had no idea what it was. It wasn't his plan. But as soon as he got in as president, this is who he appoints, and this is what they're doing. So let's listen to what Angus King had to say on the floor of the Senate. I think it was Friday. So again, and that's Friday, what was it, the 8th, I think it was, or the 8th?
7th.
The 7th, or, yeah. So
Of February.
Yeah, Friday the 7th of February.
We all began our careers here with the following words. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When each of us arrived here in the Senate, we took this oath to support and defend the Constitution, and as it says, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think it's interesting that the framers conceived that there might be domestic enemies to the Constitution. Our oath was not to the Republican Party, not to the Democratic Party, not to Joe Biden, not to Donald Trump, but our oath was to defend the Constitution. And right now, literally at this moment, that Constitution is under the most direct and consequential assault in our nation's history. An assault not on a particular provision, but on the essential structure of the document itself. It's hard to grasp what is happening because of all the events that are swirling around us over the last several weeks. It's happening so fast, coming from so many different quarters and so many different actors. It's hard to get a picture of what's really happening fundamentally. But this is an assault, and how we respond to it will define our life's work, our place in history, and the future of our country. None of us will ever face a greater challenge. Before we get to the challenge, however, I think it's important to ask why we have a Constitution in the first place, why ours has so far stood the test of time. The answer to the first question, why have a Constitution in the first place, is contained in the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, there's number one, establish justice, number two, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. These are the basic purposes. If you want to know what the Constitution's for, there it is. There's the list. Ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, ensure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. But there's a paradox at the heart of the creation of any government, whether it's here or anywhere else on earth and anywhere else in history. There's a paradox built in, because the essence of creating government is to give it power, give it our power, in order to look after us, in order to provide for the common defense, to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide justice to our people. In other words, we're giving our power to this separate entity. But we have to do so with the realization that the power that's being given has the potential to be abused. In other words, how do we give power to this entity, this government, and ensure that the government itself doesn't use that power to abuse us as citizens? This is a question at the heart of all political discussion throughout history. The Romans even had a question that captured it. The question was, quis custodiet ipsos custodes? It means, who will guard the guardians? Who will guard those who we have given power to guard us? It's a fundamental question that's confronted every society and every government throughout history. Madison put it this way, and by the way, he used a gender-specific term. I suspect if he were writing today, it would be more broadly phrased, but here's what Madison said in the 51st Federalist. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. But in framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed. That's the function. And in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Our framers understood this. They were deep students of history and also human nature. And they had just won a lengthy and brutal war against the abuses inherent in concentrated governmental power. George III. The universal principle of human nature they understood was this: power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's a universal principle all over the world throughout history. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So how did they answer the question? How did they answer the question, who will guard the guardians? They answered it by building into the basic structure of our government two essential safeguards. One was regular elections. In other words, returning the control of the government to the people on regular scheduled elections. By the way, this is what we learned in 6th grade, checks and balances. But the other piece that's built into our system, that's the other essential safeguard, is the deliberate division of power between the branches and levels of government. This is important, Mr. President. The cumbersomeness, the slowness, the clumsiness is built into our system. The framers were so fearful of concentrated power that they designed a system that would be hard to operate. And the heart of it was the separation of power between various parts of the government. The whole idea was that no part of the government, no one person, no one institution had or could ever have a monopoly on power. Why? Because it's dangerous. History and human nature tells us that. This division of power, as annoying and inefficient as it can be, particularly to the executive, I know because I used to be a governor, is an essential feature of the system, not a bug. It's an essential, basic feature of the system designed to protect our freedoms. Now, this contrasts with the normal structure of a private business, where authority is purposefully concentrated, allowing swift and sometimes arbitrary action. But a private business does not have the army. And the President of the United States is not the CEO of America. Power is shared, principally between the President and this body, this Congress, both houses. In fact, this herky-jerky structure of checks and balances, vetoes, two houses, jurisdiction left to the states, the war power divided between the President and the Congress, this unwieldy structure is the whole idea. No one has or should ever have all the power. So the concern I'm raising today isn't some academic exercise or manifestation of political jealousy or abstract institutional loyalty. It's the guts of the system, designed to protect us from the inevitable, and I mean inevitable, abuse of an authoritarian state. The inevitable abuse of an authoritarian state. It's the guts of our protection. In fact, this clumsy system is the mainspring of our freedom. And by the way, it's worked so far, and distinguishes us from the historical norm. We have to understand, we are an anomaly in history. The historical norm is pharaohs, kings, dictators, emperors, presidents for life. But the fact that we are such an anomaly And we've seen in our lifetimes other governments, other systems based upon ours slip into authoritarianism and dictatorship. Tells us how fragile what we have is. What we have in this country is an anomaly in history, and it's fragile, and it needs to be, must be protected from generation to generation. This makes this moment all the more urgent and portentous. Now, the nominee before us today is one of the ringleaders of this assault. One of the ringleaders of the assault on our Constitution. He believes in a presidency of virtually unlimited powers. He's written extensively about this and explicitly rejects, for example, the exclusive power of Congress to authorize and appropriate funds for the operation of the government. He espouses the discredited and illegal theory that the president has the power to selectively impound funds appropriated by Congress, thereby rendering the famous power of the purse a nullity. This is what I'm talking about, Mr. President. I'm not talking about the specifics, and I will touch on AID and other issues, but what I'm really worried about are the implications, the structural implications for our freedom and our government of what's happening here. We have to keep our eye on the big picture, not all the confusion and smoke that's going on over the last couple of weeks. Mr. Vogt is one of the principal authors of the infamous Project 2025, which the president strangely hadn't heard of during the campaign, but now seems to be the essential guideline for his presidency. Project 2025 is nothing less than a blueprint for the shredding of the Constitution and the transition of our country to authoritarian rule. He's the last person who should be put in a job at the heart of the operation of our government. Again, this isn't about politics. This isn't about policy. This isn't about Republican versus Democrat. This is about tampering with the structure of our government, which will ultimately undermine its ability to protect the freedom of our citizens. If our defense of the Constitution is gone, there's nothing left to us. Sir Thomas More said, "I expected you to betray me, Richard, but for Wales, we should not betray the Constitution for a temporary expedient because we don't like this or that agency." Now I want to speak to my Republican colleagues. It is your constitutional prerogative to confirm this nominee and any others. I do not question that right, only its wisdom. And this nominee is a place to say no to the undermining and destruction of our constitutional system. But don't stand aside in the midst of these confirmations, ill-considered foreign policy pronouncements, flood of executive orders, none of which, by the way, will do a thing about the price of eggs, the cost of housing, the availability of childcare. Don't get caught up in all of that and ignore the steady and not so slow usurpation of congressional authority and fundamental alteration of the framers' scheme. My colleague who preceded me, speaking from the Republican side of the aisle, bemoaned Congress's lack of oversight and praised Elon Musk for doing what Congress should have done. Maybe she's right and Congress should have done it, and we should do it, but not give away that power, which will never come back. Once this door is open, it's going to be very difficult to close it again, no matter who the president is, no matter who's in charge. To my colleagues, are there no red lines? Are there no limits? Just in the past 10 days, we've seen the literal destruction of a statutorily, I emphasize that word, statutorily established and funded federal agency by people ostensibly working for the president under vague authority, no transparency, and certainly no guidance from the Congress. Did they come to the Foreign Relations Committee and say, what do you think about AID? Are there parts of it we should work with and there are parts of it that could be reformed? No, there was zero. This small group, and we don't know who they are, but this small group, apparently it's reported in their 20s, have no experience with government, no experience with foreign aid, no experience with the operation of the United States government. But they're making basically policy decisions and constitutional decisions. The Constitution does not give to the president or his designee the power to extinguish a statutorily established agency. I can think of no greater violation of the strictures of the Constitution or usurpation of the power of this body. None. I can think of none. Shouldn't this be a red line? And by the way, I find it especially galling to read the sneering comment from the richest man in the world. The quote, "We spent the weekend feeding USAID into the chipper," describing an action that will literally take food from the mouths of starving children. Forget red lines. Do we have no decency? And then there is the executive order freezing funding, again, selectively for programs the administration doesn't like or understand. I mentioned that I was a former governor. I would have loved to have had this power. But it's a fundamental violation of the whole idea of the Constitution, the separation of powers. To say that the executive, you can pick and choose which laws you like, which funding programs you like, the level of funding you can impound if you don't want to spend it. Richard Nixon tried to do that. He was rebuffed by the Congress, who passed a specific statute, no impoundments. In addition to the chaos, the uncertainty, and the demonstrable damage, which my colleagues have been outlining all day brilliantly, there's nothing theoretical about cutting off funding to a rural health clinic, for example, or support for small farmers or grants to your fire department. But getting away from those specifics, and it's easy to get pulled into those, and my office is hearing calls every day, we can hardly handle the volume. This, again, to underline, is a frontal assault of our power, your power, the power to decide where public funds should be spent. Isn't this an obvious red line? Isn't this an obvious limit? Or finally, and I've just sort of picked a few examples, but my final example is the power seemingly assumed by DOGE to burrow into the Treasury's payment system, the Office of Personnel Management, and now CMS, for undefined purposes, zero oversight, which raises questions up to and including threats to national security. Do these people have clearance? Are the doors closed? Are they going to leave open doors into these? What are the opportunities for our adversaries to hack into the systems? We're already under unprecedented cyber attack, and we're opening doors. Although it's impossible to determine what they are taking, remember there's no transparency or oversight. Access to Social Security numbers seem to be in the mix. All the government's personnel files, personal financial data, potentially everyone's tax returns and medical records. That can't be good. That can't be good. That's data that should be protected with the highest level of security and consideration of Americans' privacy. And we don't know who these people are. We don't know what they're taking out with them. We don't know whether they're walking out with laptops or thumb drives. We don't know whether they're leaving back doors into the system. There is literally no oversight. The government of the United States is not a private company. It is fundamentally at odds with how this system is supposed to work. Shouldn't this be an easy red line? In short, Mr. President, we're experiencing in real time exactly what the framers most feared. When you clear away the smoke, clear away the DOGE, the executive orders, foreign policy pronouncements, more fundamentally, what's happening is the shredding of the constitutional structure itself. And we have a profound responsibility, it seems to me, based on that pesky oath that we all took, to stop it. to stop it. We can, if the Republican members want to appoint Mr. Vogt, okay, that's fine. But it's not fine, it's terrible, but that's their right. But stop what's going on in terms of altering how our government is supposed to fundamentally function to protect our people. The power of the majority is with you, my Republican colleagues. Together, we have the power to right the balance, to reclaim the authority we thought was inherent in our jobs, and in the process, save our country. At a prior time of crisis, Abraham Lincoln came here, December 2nd, 1862, and he defined the stakes for all of us. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration, this could have been written yesterday, we of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. No personal significance or insignificance can spare one or another of us. We will be written down through history. We will be lit through history in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. I would suggest, Mr. President, that the red line should be the Constitution of the United States. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Wow.
That's a profile in courage right there. And I think it just was extraordinary.
And we're in extraordinary times, and he was able to point it out.
Yeah.
But people, especially the Republicans, have to stand up. They have to get a backbone.
Well, I'm going to go farther and say everybody has to stand
Yeah,
up now.
everyone does now,
Yes,
yeah.
because as I said on our last program, I believe this is a bloodless coup that is already causing
Right,
blood throughout the world.
right. I mean, it's a really sad situation.
And I'm glad you keep doing April 4th Coalition because this is one of the ways we stand up
Yeah,
and
we
speak out.
Yeah, we try to educate people. I went down to the city clerk's office, contacted them. I want to do a charter reform petition, just so I can go and educate people that the reason why we have the form of government here in North Adams is because we choose to have it. You sign this petition, you elect people to a charter commission, you can choose whatever kind of government you want for North Adams. It doesn't have to be a mayor, it could be a town, but as an educational tool, so people realize that we have that power. It's not the people on top. The government secures their rights through us. We empower them, and we have the right to stand up to that power. You know, and so I want to demonstrate that locally, and we have to do that throughout our state, and
And
we have to do
nationally,
it
yeah.
nationally. I remember Bill Clinton, the first person I ever heard talk about it, I always thought the division of the balance of power, there were Congress and President and judicial, but he included the state governments and local governments too. That's another division of power, but we got to get power to the people, right?
Yes.
Power to
Power
the
to
people.
Just like it says in our Constitution.
No doubt about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sing it out.